Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're taking a look at middle childhood.
Those fascinating years between 6 and 11.
You got it.
Hmm.
And our listeners provided a really cool chapter from a developmental psychology textbook.
Oh, fantastic.
So we're going to really break down what's going on in kids' heads and hearts during this time, how they view themselves, their friends, their families, all that good stuff. I think we're going to learn a lot today.
Definitely.
It's going to be fun.
Yeah.
You know, I was prepping for this and thinking about that cartoonist Ward Sutton. Did you know he actually got his start in 5th grade?
Really?
Yeah. It turns out a classmate's mom really encouraged him, told him to submit his cartoons to the local newspaper.
Wow, what a great story.
Isn't that something? It really shows how much community support can affect kids at this age.
Absolutely. Middle childhood is such a pivotal time. Kids are becoming more independent, and they're really starting to compare themselves to others, figuring out where they fit in.
Totally. And the chapter jumps right into that. It's amazing how much more kids can do at this age.
Oh, for sure.
Like packing a suitcase, walking to school on their own,
Yeah.
organizing games with their friends.
It's a whole new level of competence.
Right.
They're driven to master skills, feel capable. This is where Erikson's theory of industry versus inferiority really comes in.
Ah, yes. That classic tug of war.
Exactly.
So what happens when kids don't feel competent? Is that an automatic ticket to feeling inferior?
Well, not necessarily. This is also when social comparison kicks into high gear.
Oh, yeah?
Kids are constantly sizing each other up, which can be motivating but also really discouraging.
Makes sense. They're trying to figure out where they stand.
Exactly. On the one hand, it helps them develop a realistic self-concept. On the other hand, it can lead to some serious insecurity.
Especially in today's world with social media and everything.
Oh, definitely. The pressures are even higher now.
It makes you wonder, is a super high self-esteem always the best thing?
That's a great question. And it's interesting to consider how different cultures view self-esteem.
Oh, that's right. The chapter mentions that, doesn't it?
Yeah. Some cultures really value humility and discourage standing out too much.
Like, for example, Australians have that saying, tall poppies get cut down.
Exactly. It's a reminder that there are lots of different ways to view success and achievement.
I never thought of it that way. You know, there's one thing in this chapter that really surprised me. It's about resilience.
Oh, yeah. What about it?
You'd think major traumas would always be the worst. But the chapter says sometimes those everyday stresses can actually be more harmful in the long run.
It's true. It's the accumulation of little stresses over time that can really wear a kid down.
It's like death by 1,000 paper cuts.
Exactly. The chapter uses a really interesting example to illustrate this. Child soldiers in Sierra Leone.
Wow, that's heavy stuff.
Yeah, a lot of those kids went through horrific trauma, but the research shows that those who had strong caregiver support,
Okay.
community acceptance, and routines in their lives, they actually bounced back much better.
Wow. So even in the face of truly awful experiences, those support systems can make a world of difference.
It really shows the power of how a kid interprets their situation. Even when facing challenges, if they feel loved, supported, and like they can cope,
Right.
they're way more likely to be resilient.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
It makes me think about kids dealing with everyday challenges, like parents going through a divorce or trying to fit in at school. What can we learn from these child soldiers and apply to those situations?
It all comes down to giving kids that sense of stability,
Okay.
belonging, and a belief that they can handle things. It's about providing those tools to navigate challenges.
So it's about building their resilience.
Exactly. Give them those tools, and they can surprise you with their strength.
That's so important. And even though genes and peers become more important during middle childhood, the chapter really emphasizes that family is still the foundation.
Oh, absolutely. Family dynamics play a huge role at this age. But there's a twist.
Oh, I love a good twist.
Turns out siblings raised in the same home don't always have the same experience.
Really? But they're growing up under the same roof.
You'd think so, right? But the chapter talks about the study of identical twins in England. The researchers found that mothers sometimes favored one twin over the other,
Oh, wow.
and that had a big impact on their behavior.
Makes you wonder about all those nature versus nurture debates, huh?
For sure, it shows how powerful that non-shared environment can be, even within the same family.
So, is family structure as important as we think? Does it really matter if a kid grows up in a nuclear family versus a single-parent family or an extended family?
That's where we need to talk about the difference between family structure, who's in the family, and family function, how well they care for each other.
Okay, I see the distinction.
And it's function that matters most.
So a well-functioning family is the real key, regardless of the specific structure.
Exactly. A well-functioning family is like a well-oiled machine. It may have different parts, but they all work together smoothly.
Makes sense. But what does a well-functioning family actually do? What makes them so successful?
The chapter outlines 5 key things.
Okay, hit me with them.
Providing physical necessities like food, shelter, clothing. Supporting learning, both in and out of school. Nurturing self-respect, helping kids feel good about themselves. Fostering peer relationships, encouraging healthy friendships. And finally, creating a sense of harmony and stability in the home.
Those are all really important. But different family structures probably face unique challenges in meeting those needs, right?
Absolutely. Every family structure has its strengths and weaknesses.
Like nuclear families.
Yeah.
Even though they're often considered the ideal, they can still face challenges.
Oh, for sure. Think about financial stress, parental conflict, the everyday juggle of work and family life. It can all create tension.
And single-parent families are often juggling even more responsibilities.
Absolutely. They have to wear so many hats.
Right. It's like they're the breadwinner, the caregiver, the disciplinarian, all rolled into one.
And often while dealing with emotional and financial strain.
Exactly. That can make it really hard to provide that consistent, stable environment that kids need.
Definitely. And then you have step families, which come with a whole other set of dynamics.
Yeah, blending two families together must be super complicated.
It is. There are often issues with divided loyalties, adjusting to new routines, and figuring out those relationships with step-parents and step-siblings. It takes time and effort to create a truly cohesive family unit.
And what about extended families? It seems like having grandparents or other relatives around could be helpful, but I'm guessing it's not always easy.
You're right. It can be a great source of support, but it can also lead to disagreements about child rearing.
Ah, yeah, I can see that happening.
It can sometimes feel overcrowded or strain family finances.
So it really seems like no family structure is automatically better than another.
Exactly. It all comes down to how well they function as a unit, how well they meet those 5 key needs.
It's all about quality over quantity, right?
You got it. But regardless of the specific structure, there are 2 big threats to family function that we need to talk about.
Ooh, I'm all ears.
Low income and high conflict. These 2 factors can really undermine a family's ability to thrive.
I can definitely see how money problems could put a strain on relationships.
Absolutely. The family stress model explains this really well. Basically, when families struggle financially, it increases stress on parents.
Right, makes sense.
And that stress can make them less patient and less responsive to their kids.
Like a domino effect.
Exactly. It trickles down from the parents to the kids.
But, the chapter also mentions that wealth can create its own set of problems.
Oh, absolutely. High-income families often face intense pressure to excel.
Oh, yeah. Keeping up with the Joneses.
Exactly. And that can lead to a whole different kind of stress that can also be harmful to kids.
So it's really about how families manage those pressures, whether they're struggling financially or swimming in affluence.
It's all about creating that supportive and nurturing environment no matter what their economic situation is.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, what about conflict? Everyone argues sometimes, but when does it become a problem for kids?
Well, the research is pretty clear. Frequent, intense, unresolved conflict creates a toxic environment.
Gotcha. So it's not just about the occasional disagreement, it's about that constant tension and negativity.
Exactly. Children are like sponges. They absorb the emotional climate of their home, whether we realize it or not.
Makes you think twice about those little arguments, right?
Absolutely. We need to be mindful of the emotional environment we're creating for our kids.
Okay, on to a topic I think we can all relate to. Peers. Middle school was when my social life basically became my whole world.
It's definitely when those pure relationships take center stage. Kids are learning social skills, navigating those complex hierarchies.
Right. Figuring out who's in and who's out.
Exactly. And forming bonds that can have a huge impact on how they see themselves.
And then there's that whole thing about kids this age rejecting everything their parents think and do. Like suddenly mom and dad are the enemy.
It's not always about rejecting parents so much as embracing child culture.
But what's that?
It's that unique set of customs, rules, and rituals that kids create and share amongst themselves.
You mean like jump rope rhymes, secret languages,
Exactly.
those fashion trends that make us adults cringe?
It's all part of child culture.
And it's their way of asserting independence, right? Like, hey, we have our own thing going on here.
Exactly. They're setting their own social norms, figuring out where they belong.
It's fascinating how they create these little worlds of their own.
It is. And speaking of child culture, the chapter mentions this really interesting historical tidbit.
I'm always up for a good history lesson.
Well, get this. That rhyme, Ring Around the Rosie, might actually be about the Black Death.
No way. Really?
It's a chilling reminder of how child culture can reflect the realities of the world around them, even in the face of tragedy.
Wow, that's heavy. Okay, let's talk about popularity. I think we all remember those kids who were part of the in crowd and those who weren't.
Ah, yes, those social hierarchies. And during middle childhood, they really start to solidify.
It's like those invisible lines get drawn.
And it's interesting to note that there are different paths to popularity.
Really? Like what?
Some kids achieve it by being friendly and cooperative, while others gain status through assertiveness or even aggression.
So it's not always the nice kids who are at the top of the social ladder.
Not necessarily. Sometimes it's the kids who are seen as strong or confident, even intimidating.
Makes you wonder what messages that sends to kids.
For sure, it's a complex issue with no easy answers.
What about the kids who aren't popular? Are they all just quiet and shy?
There are actually three main categories of unpopular kids: neglected, aggressive rejected, and withdrawn rejected.
Can you break those down for us?
Sure, neglected kids are kind of like wallflowers. They're not disliked, but they're not really on anyone's radar either.
Okay.
Aggressive rejected kids are disliked because they're confrontational, often bullying others. And withdrawn rejected kids tend to be shy and anxious, often isolating themselves.
And that, unfortunately, leads us to the topic of bullying.
It's a harsh reality, but one we can't ignore.
The chapter doesn't sugarcoat it. It says straight up that bullying happens in every nation and every type of school.
It's a global problem that takes many forms, from physical and verbal abuse to relational aggression and cyberbullying.
It's sobering to realize how widespread it is. It's not just an issue in certain environments, it's everywhere.
And it highlights the need to address it systemically.
Right, we can't just brush it under the rug.
We need to tackle those underlying social and cultural factors that contribute to bullying.
So what does the chapter say about why some kids become bullies and others become victims?
Well, one common thread is difficulty with social cognition.
What does that mean exactly?
It means they struggle to read social cues, understand others' perspectives, and regulate their own emotions.
So they might misinterpret a situation, which could lead to aggression or withdrawal.
Exactly. And it can become a vicious cycle. Bullies lash out for dominance,
Right.
and victims become targets because they lack the social skills to navigate those power dynamics.
The chapter also busts a common myth about victims. It says it's not always about being unattractive or odd. It's more about emotional vulnerability and social isolation.
Such an important point. Often it's the kids who are new to a school, have different backgrounds, or struggle to fit in who become targets.
Because they don't have that protective network of friends and support.
Exactly. And this is where the role of bystanders becomes crucial.
Those who see what's happening but don't intervene.
Right. Bystanders have the power to either stop bullying or let it continue.
It's like they're at a crossroads.
When they remain silent, or worse, join in, they're basically condoning the behavior.
And contributing to that culture of fear.
Exactly. But the good news is that there are things we can do to prevent and address bullying effectively.
Oh, good. What are some of those strategies?
The key is shifting the focus from punishing bullies to creating an environment where bullying is less likely to happen in the first place.
So it's about being proactive rather than reactive.
Exactly. It's about fostering empathy, teaching positive social skills, and empowering bystanders to step in when they see something wrong.
Like teaching them how to be upstanders instead of bystanders.
Exactly. And remember that Spanish concept we talked about earlier, convivencia?
Vaguely. Remind me.
It's about creating a school culture that's built on cooperation and respect, where everyone feels valued and supported.
That sounds like a great antidote to bullying.
It really is. When kids feel connected to their school community, they're less likely to bully or be bullied.
Okay, last but not least, let's talk about morality. How do kids this age figure out what's right and wrong?
That's a question that has puzzled philosophers for centuries.
Right, it's a big one.
It is. And during middle childhood, kids move beyond those simple rule-based ideas of morality.
Like, don't hit your sister or share your toys.
Exactly. They start grappling with more complex moral dilemmas.
So it's less about blindly following the rules and more about understanding the why behind them.
Precisely. And this moral development is shaped by three main forces: child culture, empathy, and education.
We've already talked about child culture,
Mm.
but how does that influence a kid's moral compass? It seems like it could create some conflicts.
It definitely can. Sometimes those peer values clash with adult standards.
Like when a kid lies to protect a friend, even though they know lying is wrong.
Exactly. Their loyalty to their friends can sometimes override their sense of right and wrong.
So it's a tug of war between those different influences.
It is. And this is where empathy comes in. As kids develop that ability to understand and share the feelings of others,
Right.
they become more aware of how their actions impact those around them.
It's like they're expanding their circle of concern.
Exactly. They're moving beyond just thinking about themselves and starting to consider the bigger picture.
And that understanding of consequences is a key step in moral development.
Absolutely. It helps them move beyond those simplistic ideas of right and wrong and start to grapple with the nuances of ethical dilemmas.
The chapter uses a really interesting example to illustrate this. It's about a boy who accidentally broke his dad's window while playing ball.
Oh, yeah. I love that story.
Me too. The researchers asked a bunch of kids what they thought was the fairest way to punish the boy. Should he have to pay for the window or be sent to his room?
It's a classic moral dilemma.
It is. So what did the kids say?
Well, initially, many of them were all about punishment.
Eye for an eye, right?
Exactly. But after they talked about it with their peers and considered different perspectives, they started shifting towards a more restorative approach.
What's that?
It's about focusing on repairing the harm rather than just punishing the wrongdoer.
Interesting. So just talking it through and considering different viewpoints helped them develop a more nuanced perspective.
It did, and it highlights how important open dialogue and critical thinking are for moral development.
It's not about just telling kids what to think.
Right. We need to give them space to wrestle with those complex issues and figure things out for themselves.
With a little guidance from us along the way.
Exactly. We can facilitate those discussions, challenge their assumptions, and help them see things from different angles.
And it sounds like it's less about lecturing and more about creating a space for them to think critically about these issues.
Exactly. We want to foster a culture of dialogue and critical thinking where kids feel safe to explore these complex moral questions.
That's such a great point. And I think it applies to so many aspects of child development.
It does. It's not about dictating answers, but rather equipping them with the tools to think for themselves.
We've already covered so much ground today, and it's clear that middle childhood is a time of immense growth and change.
It's a truly remarkable stage of development where so much is happening on so many different levels.
And while there will always be challenges, it's also a time of incredible potential and resilience.
Absolutely. Kids at this age are so adaptable and eager to learn. It's truly inspiring to witness.
Before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, we want to leave you with a question to ponder. We've talked a lot about the importance of creating supportive environments for kids.
Yes. Environments where they feel loved, safe, and empowered to learn and grow.
But we also know that not all children have equal access to those resources.
Sadly, that's true.
So our question for you is this. What are some ways we can advocate for systemic change to ensure that all children, regardless of background or circumstance, have the opportunity to thrive?
It's a challenge, but a worthy one.
It is. It's about moving beyond individual actions and considering our collective responsibility to create a more just and equitable world for all children.
I couldn't agree more.
We'll be back soon with part 2 of this deep dive, where we'll continue exploring the fascinating world of middle childhood.
Looking forward to it.
Until then, keep those brains buzzing and those hearts open.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of middle childhood.
We're picking up right where we left off, exploring those social dynamics and all those developmental milestones
Absolutely.
that really shape these amazing years, right?
They really do. It's such a fascinating age group.
Yeah. And, as we're digging deeper into this chapter, it's interesting how much emphasis there is on the interplay of nature and nurture.
It's a classic debate.
Right? How a kid's temperament and the environment they're raised in, like all of that works together
Right.
to shape their social development.
It's like a recipe. Right.
Yeah.
You've got the ingredients, but then how you mix them and bake them really makes a difference.
I love that analogy. And, this interplay really comes to life when we look at peer groups.
Oh, absolutely.
which we talked about earlier. They become so central during middle childhood.
Right. It's like their own little society with all its complexities and rules and social codes.
Yeah. And they have to learn how to navigate all of that.
Exactly. And peer culture can be such a powerful force.
Right.
It teaches them valuable social skills. It gives them a sense of belonging,
Right.
but it also has a darker side.
That's where bullying comes in, which we talked about a bit earlier.
Yeah.
And the chapter really digs deep into the causes and consequences of that.
It's a tough topic, but an important one.
It is. And, I was really struck by how both bullies and victims
Right.
often share certain characteristics,
That's right.
like those challenges with social cognition.
Right. They might misinterpret social cues, struggle to see things from other people's perspectives, or have a hard time managing their emotions.
So it's like they're not always seeing the full picture.
Exactly. And that can lead to misinterpretations and miscommunications, which then fuels those cycles of aggression and withdrawal.
Right. They might misread a situation entirely,
Exactly.
leading to either lashing out
Yeah.
or kind of retreating inwards.
And this can become a vicious cycle where bullies assert dominance through aggression, while victims become targets because they lack those social skills to kind of deflect or navigate those power dynamics.
And the chapter also talks about that common myth about victims,
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
that it's always about being unattractive or odd or something like that.
Like there's something inherently wrong with them.
Yeah, right, exactly. But the chapter really emphasizes emotional vulnerability and social isolation.
So it's not about some inherent flaw, but more about the context and the circumstances.
Exactly. Often it's the kids who are new to a school.
Yeah,
Or maybe they come from a different background or they just struggle to fit in.
right. They haven't had the chance to build those strong social connections.
Yeah, so they become targets because they don't have that kind of safety net of friends and support.
And this is where the role of bystanders becomes so crucial.
It does, those who see what's happening.
But don't intervene.
But don't step in, yeah.
They have so much power in those situations.
They really do. And, it makes you think about all those times when maybe we could have spoken up or done something but didn't.
It's a tough one. But, the chapter doesn't just paint this bleak picture. It
Right.
actually offers some really practical strategies for reducing bullying.
Oh, good, because I was getting a little bit like, oh, man, this is so depressing.
I know it can feel overwhelming. But, the key is to shift the focus from just punishing bullies to proactively creating an environment
Okay.
where it's less likely to happen in the first place.
It's like preventing the fire rather than just putting it out all the time.
Exactly. We need to be proactive, not reactive.
Right, I get it.
Yeah.
So how do we do that? How do we create those bully-proof environments?
Well, the chapter highlights several strategies, things like fostering empathy, teaching kids how to understand and share each other's feelings,
Okay.
teaching positive social skills so kids have the tools to navigate conflict constructively,
Right.
and empowering bystanders to step in when they see something wrong, like giving them the skills and confidence to be upstanders, not bystanders.
I love that.
Yeah, so
Upstanders.
It's all about creating a culture where bullying is not tolerated.
And it reminds me of that Spanish concept we talked about, convivencia.
Yes, I was just thinking about that.
It's about creating a school culture that's based on cooperation and respect.
Where everyone feels valued, everyone feels safe.
Like they belong,
Exactly. It's creating a sense of community.
which is so important.
And when kids feel connected to their school community, they're much less likely to bully or be bullied.
It's like that old saying, it takes a village.
It really does. We need to work together to create these supportive environments.
Absolutely. Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about moral development.
One of my favorite topics.
It's a fascinating one. This section really got me thinking about all the complex ethical questions kids grapple with.
Right. They're trying to make sense of the world.
Yeah, it's not just about simple rules anymore.
Exactly. They're moving beyond that black and white thinking and starting to see things in shades of gray.
Right, they're starting to question things, to think for themselves.
Exactly. And this is where Kohlberg's theory of moral reasoning comes in.
Ah, yes, the famous stages of moral development.
Exactly. He proposed that moral development progresses through these distinct stages, each marked by a more sophisticated way of thinking about right and wrong.
It's like climbing a ladder, right?
Yeah, it is. Each rung represents a higher level of moral reasoning.
But the chapter points out that Kohlberg's theory has also been criticized.
Oh yeah, for sure. No theory is perfect.
Right. Some critics say it's too focused on logic and reasoning.
And that it doesn't always account for the emotional side of moral decision-making.
Or the fact that different cultures might approach ethical questions in different ways.
It's a good reminder that human development is complex and there's no one-size-fits-all explanation.
And the chapter also reminds us that there's another powerful force at play here, the influence of child culture on moral development.
Right, that unique set of values and behaviors that kids develop and share within their peer groups.
Like their own little moral code.
Exactly. And sometimes those peer values can clash with adult standards, leading to situations where a child might make a choice that seems surprising or even out of character.
Like when Ward Sutton vandalized that house with his friends.
Oh, right. Even though he knew it was wrong, he got swept up in the group dynamic.
It shows how strong peer pressure can be, especially at that age.
And it highlights how kids need guidance in navigating those morally ambiguous situations.
So how do we do that? How do we guide kids' moral development without just dictating rules and expecting blind obedience?
It's about creating a space for open and honest dialogue,
Okay.
encouraging them to consider different viewpoints, helping them understand the real-world consequences of their choices.
So it's about teaching them how to think critically about these issues.
Exactly. And also modeling ethical behavior in our own lives.
Right, leading by example.
It's powerful. Kids learn by watching us, so we need to show them what it looks like to be compassionate, responsible, and principled individuals.
Okay, so we've talked about how kids' social and moral development are shaped by all these different factors, both internal and external. But the chapter also acknowledges that sometimes those external factors can create some real challenges for kids.
Right. Sometimes kids face situations that require extra support.
Like we talked about bullying, but there's also poverty,
Yeah.
abuse, neglect, all those things that can really impact a child's well-being.
And it's heartbreaking to think about.
It is. But it's important to acknowledge these realities so we can better understand how they can affect kids' development.
Absolutely. And the chapter emphasizes that while we can't shield children from every hardship, we can create more supportive environments and give them the tools to navigate tough situations.
So it's about building resilience, teaching them how to cope.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And providing access to resources and support systems when they need them.
And this is where that concept of protective factors comes in, right?
Yes. Those positive influences in a child's life that can help buffer against adversity.
Like having strong family relationships.
Yeah.
Positive peer interactions, a supportive school environment, access to mental health services when needed.
All those things can make a huge difference.
It's like building a safety net around them.
That's a great way to put it. It's about providing that foundation of support so they can stand strong even when things get tough.
And, it's not just about reacting after problems arise. It's also about being proactive, creating those environments that nurture well-being from the start.
Exactly. Prevention is key.
And this applies not just to families and schools,
Right.
but to society as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. We need to advocate for policies and programs that support families,
Yeah.
strengthen communities, and ensure that all children have the opportunity to thrive.
So it's about recognizing that child development isn't just a personal responsibility,
Right.
but a collective one.
It really does take a village to raise a child. We all have a role to play in creating a world that supports healthy development.
I love that. And this deep dive has really opened my eyes to the complexities of middle childhood.
It's such a fascinating stage.
It is. And I'm sure our listener is feeling the same way.
It's been an amazing journey so far.
It has. And we're not done yet. There's
Yeah.
still more to unpack in this incredible chapter.
I can't wait to dive into the next part.
Me too. So join us again for part 3 of this deep dive, where we'll explore the final stretch of this chapter.
We'll uncover even more insights about how kids navigate this crucial stage of development.
It's going to be good.
Yeah.
All right, we're back for the final part of our deep dive into middle childhood.
I'm excited to wrap things up.
Me too. And we've covered so much already. We've talked about self-concept and resilience and those complex family dynamics.
The power of peer relationships.
Right. It's been a whirlwind.
It has. But we've saved one of the most fascinating topics for last.
Ooh, I love a good grand finale. What is it?
Moral development.
Ah, yes, the age-old question of how kids figure out right from wrong.
It feels like we've been circling this idea throughout the entire chapter.
We have, like it's been this underlying thread connecting all the different pieces.
And now we're finally going to zoom in and explore it in depth.
I'm ready. Hit me with those insights.
So as we dive into this section, I think you'll notice that the chapter really emphasizes the dynamic nature of moral development.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
It's not just about memorizing a set of rules and then following them blindly.
Right, it's not like a one-time download.
Exactly. It's an ongoing process of growth and refinement.
Like their moral compass is constantly being recalibrated as they encounter a new situation.
Exactly. And, those three key forces we keep coming back to, child culture, empathy, and education, they all play a crucial role in this process.
We've talked about those throughout the chapter, but I'd love to hear more about how these specifically shape a child's moral development.
Absolutely. Let's start with child culture. We've talked about how it can sometimes clash with adult standards of behavior.
Right, like when a kid lies to protect a friend.
Exactly. They know lying is wrong, but their loyalty to their peers can sometimes override those abstract moral principles.
It's like their heart is pulling them in one direction and their head is pulling them in another.
Exactly. And for kids at this age, those peer relationships are so powerful.
They really are.
They're trying to figure out where they fit in, who they are.
It makes sense that those peer influences would have such a strong impact on their moral decision-making.
And this is where empathy comes in.
That ability to step into someone else's shoes and understand their feelings.
Exactly. As kids develop empathy, they become more attuned to how their actions affect others.
So they start to realize that their choices have consequences not just for themselves.
Right. But for the people around them.
It's like they're expanding their circle of concern.
It is. They're moving beyond egocentrism and starting to think about the bigger picture.
And, the chapter uses a really great example to illustrate this. It's the story about the boy who accidentally broke his dad's window while playing ball.
Oh, yeah. I love that story.
Such a classic moral dilemma, right?
It is. So the researchers asked a bunch of kids what they thought the fairest punishment would be. Should the boy have to pay for the window, or should he be sent to his room?
Tough call. What did the kids say?
Initially, a lot of them favored punishment. They're like, well, he broke the rules, so he has to face the consequences.
Eye for an eye, right?
Exactly. But then something interesting happened. After they talked it through with their peers and considered different viewpoints, they started shifting toward a more restorative approach.
What's that?
It's about focusing on repairing the harm that was done rather than just punishing the wrongdoer.
Okay, so instead of making the boy pay for the window, maybe he could help fix it or do some chores around the house to make amends.
Exactly. It's about accountability and reconciliation.
I love that.
Mhm.
So just the act of discussing the dilemma with their peers helped them develop a more nuanced perspective.
It did. It broadened their understanding of fairness and justice.
It's a great reminder that moral development isn't about just memorizing rules. It's about engaging in those critical thinking processes.
Exactly. And this is where adults come in. We can't just expect kids to figure it all out on their own.
Right, they need guidance.
They need mentors.
So it's less about lecturing and more about creating a space for them to grapple with these complex issues.
Exactly. We can facilitate those discussions. Challenge their assumptions, help them see things from different perspectives.
It's about empowering them to think for themselves.
And ultimately, to become ethical and responsible individuals.
I love that.
Mhm.
And, it's not just about what we say. It's also about how we live our own lives.
Oh, absolutely. Kids are always watching us.
They're little sponges.
They pick up on our values.
They see how we handle ethical dilemmas.
So we need to model that behavior for them. We need to show them what it looks like to be compassionate, responsible, and principled people.
It all comes back to that idea of leading by example.
It really does.
Well, this deep dive has been incredible.
It has. We covered so much ground.
We have. And it's clear that middle childhood is a time of just immense growth and transformation for kids.
It's when so many of the foundational pieces are put in place.
Right, they're figuring out who they are,
How they fit into the world.
what they believe in.
And while there will always be challenges along the way,
There will be bumps in the road.
it's also a time of incredible potential and resilience.
It's like they have this innate ability to adapt and learn and grow.
And it's so inspiring to witness.
It really is. So as we wrap up this exploration of middle childhood, we want to leave you with one final thought.
Okay, I'm listening.
Throughout this chapter, we've explored all these different factors that shape a child's development.
Their genes, their families, their peers, their culture.
Their unique experiences.
Right, it's a complex interplay of influences.
But ultimately, it's their spirit,
Yes,
their curiosity,
their resilience.
their capacity for love.
That's what makes them so remarkable.
And as adults, it's our responsibility to nurture those qualities, to champion their growth, and to strive to create a world that allows them to reach their full potential.
Beautifully said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive.
It is. Thanks for joining us on this journey into the fascinating world of middle childhood. We'll see you next time for another deep dive into the human experience.